What's the crack? Today I'm going to tell you the story of how a genre died before it even got a chance to start. I'm a strong believer that trends come back around and repeat themselves. Half the guys I went to primary school with had mullets in a decade I can assure you was not the 80s. Alf came back.
In pod form.
And I can't think of a third thing, so let's just pretend I said something funny. I believe that trends repeat themselves also extends to music. Bands like Black Veil Brides, Asking Alexandria, Escape the Fate can be arguably considered my generation's equivalent of glam music. Machine Gun Kelly has recently made pop-punk music cool again, and I can't think of a third thing again. But those are two very significant genres in two extremely different decades, so it's funny then that I've left out a genre that essentially defined the decade that it was popular in. Grunge music, in the 90s. I was certain that after metalcore music died down, it would be replaced by some new version of grunge music. Grungecore, post-grunge, grunk rock. There would be some modern equivalent that would harken back to the depressed, angry, apathetic, nihilistic outlook that the grunge bands of the 90s represented. And it wasn't just the bands, it was a whole generation of people that were sick of glam, the debauchery, the decadence, the commercialism, the fakeness. And they wanted something new. Granted, that new thing later became all of those things in arguably an even worse way, but that's beside the point. The point is, I was waiting for a generation of people that were sick of metalcore and were waiting for something that was not about looking cool, not about being fake, not about how much you party or about how many groupies you get. That never happened. I thought it would happen and it never did. I was wrong, but then for a brief moment, there was a band that made me believe that I could be right. Now, I know Epitaph as a label that's responsible for signing a lot of bands that I actually quite enjoy. Falling in Reverse, Converge, Defeater, Escape the Fate, The Distillers, Bad Religion, Rancid. Despite knowing this, they also branched out in a way that made their releases extremely inconsistent for me. Whenever I listen to something from them, I don't expect that it's going to be good, because the style of music that they're releasing now is so diverse and different from what I grew up listening to when I first got into music that I can't just get into it straight away. And I'm sure that that's the case for a lot of people that listen to earlier Epitaph releases and their outlook on the bands that I enjoyed growing up. However, about 3 years ago, I was browsing through YouTube. I noticed that Epitaph had uploaded a video to their channel less than a week earlier, and I just had to check it out. And even though I'm apprehensive about any of Epitaph's new releases, I just knew that I had to listen to this one because of the name. It was Swallow by Teenage Wrist. I was fully prepared to click on the video and hear the most whiny, emo, depressing song ever, and it was going to be hilarious. I mean, the band is called Teenage Wrist. How much more emo can you get than that? But, to my surprise, it was not a whiny emo song. Well, it was, actually, but not the same way. It didn't have high-pitched whiny vocals, it didn't have an over-the-top angry breakdown, it didn't have some chorus that was thrown in there to be catchy but the lyrics had nothing to do with the rest of the song. It was fuzzy, ambient, and it was a new version of grunge. It was a new version of grunge. And it's exactly what I would have expected a modern version of grunge music to sound like. It was just such a shot of chemicals in my brain that I had been thinking of this style of music and I had it in my head and I wanted to find a band that actually achieved that, and then I did. It happened. I had that song, Swallow, and I also had Stoned Alone blasting on my speakers for months while I waited for their debut album to come out. At this point I hadn't realised that they had an EP out previous to that, but I would later end up listening to it quite a lot as well. But I did that up until their debut album, Chrome Neon Jesus, was released. It was everything that I could hope for them to release after they had set the bar so high with those first two singles. Those first two singles, as well as other songs like Black Flamingo, Kaibo, the title track of the album, they were all regulars on my Spotify, and frankly, because I was so certain that this was going to be the new replacement for grunge, this was going to be that trend coming back, I was just gearing up for people to finally hear of this band, but everything was completely ruined. Let me explain. Roughly a year after the release of the album, their lead singer, Campton, left the band. Or was he kicked out? Don't know. They released this statement on social media and they kind of released it for him. He never made his own statement as to what he was doing at the time. At the time, he certainly didn't. But it was really kind of just like, in the exact same post, they also said, oh, but our guitarist Marshall is now going to take over on lead vocals. Okay, it's just kind of it's kind of a casual thing, you know, after being in a band with someone for 4 years and you just kind of like, you know, move on without him, you know, just like that, with very little to no explanation as to why. There wasn't even any indication of, like, was it creative differences? Was it the fact that he didn't have time? Was it personal issues? They didn't say anything like that. They just said, oh, we've parted ways with him. Now, I'm not the fondest of band member changes, but some of them have resulted in really rejuvenating a band's creativity after they've just been on the edge and they finally come back and they come back better than ever. And it's happened. It has happened. And also the fact that this was an original member of the band becoming the new singer kind of gave me a little bit of hope for it. So I was hopeful. I shouldn't have been, but I was. Oh, they also had another guitarist join after the first album was released, but they had to kick him out because he apparently had sexual misconduct allegations put against him. The band did release statements about this. I remember them specifically releasing statements about it, but none of them can be found anymore. They were taken off Instagram, they were taken off Facebook, everything else. Luckily, I found this explanation while I was doing my research. The fact that they kicked him out so quickly before an investigation was even carried out shows that they either just knew more than they were letting on and they thought it would be best just to like distance themselves from him, or they just didn't want the bad publicity, so they kicked him out before it gained any traction in the media. But the problem is, their new album is coming out in February 2021 and this guy, Chase Barham, is still on the album. He's still credited. He has songwriting credits and he also has additional guitars on several tracks. And that's weird to me. Now, only 2 tracks have been released so far in anticipation for the new album, and those I will get to, but first we're going to talk about this whole thing of the guitarist still being on the album. If you really did believe that he did something wrong, then he shouldn't be on the album, because you shouldn't want to have someone who has committed sexual misconduct in your band or on your album. You shouldn't want to associate with that if you believe he did anything wrong, okay? And the album's not coming out until February 2021. He was kicked out maybe 1 month ago or 2 months ago as I'm recording this right now in November. So it's totally conceivably possible that you would be able to re-record his guitar tracks if they were only additional guitars. It would be totally possible just to re-record his tracks. He's not a main member of the band, he was only a touring member, so I don't understand what the issue would be with just taking his tracks off of the whole thing. But then, if you don't believe that he did anything wrong, and you were just kicking him out because you didn't want the bad press, then that essentially, aside from the fact that you might have just kicked out an innocent man for no reason other than you just wanted to protect a band name, you have also completely defeated the purpose of kicking him out if he's still going to be on the album anyway. Like, it doesn't make any sense for any of his contribution to be on an album after you have decided yourself that he will no longer be associated with the band. He hasn't been associated with the band for a couple of months now, so it's kind of pointless that he'll still be on an album that the band releases months later. No matter which one of these possibilities is the truth, the band haven't followed through all the way with their ideals, and that kind of just puts doubt in my mind as to what their intentions are. Now on to the 2 singles that have come out. Okay, now we're done with the actual drama portion of it, now we're on to just the new music. The guitarist, Marshall, who took over from Campton, did his best with the vocals. He did his best, you can tell that he did. But he actually lacks a lot of what Campton has in Bucket Loads, and that is just the grunge attitude. The lyrics could be about the most urgent emergency that you have ever conceived in your life, and it's about a life or death situation, and if Campton were to sing it, it would literally sound like the most apathetic, cynical thing that you've ever heard. Like, he would sing it as though he doesn't care if you help him or not, but he doesn't expect you to either. but it's like a cynical, apathetic, emotional voice that just... Campton has an amazing voice for this kind of music. It's just incredible. And I will give it to Marshall, he did try, but those are just big boots to fill. And it's not his fault that that's the case, but unfortunately it is. The first single that they released was called Silver Spoon, and it was fine. It sounded like Teenage Wrist, sure. I listened to it 2 or 3 times and I wasn't compelled to put it back on again. But there's not much else to say about it aside from that. It was just kind of a bog standard Teenage Wrist song. There wasn't anything really new or adventurous about it, but it kind of fit in with their previous releases. And recently the first music video, Earth is a Black Hole, was released. This is when I realised that Teenage Wrist had become a manufactured brand. It starts out as a normal Teenage Wrist song, nothing bad about it necessarily. The video desperately tries to cover up the fact that there's only 2 band members by having someone and someone as extras in the video. And then the chorus kicks in and it's not a Teenage Wrist song anymore. There is no nihilism in these vocals, there's no apathy or sense of defeat in the vocalist's delivery. They put a catchy chorus with some sing-along, generic, stale melody in there, and it just sounds like plastic. It's a catchy pop song dressed up as 90s grunge. And I'm not the kind of person that dislikes when a band goes in a new direction. I'm actually the opposite, in fact. I love when bands go in a new direction. But this isn't what they were doing. The sound is exactly the same, but the shell. It's like if a tribute band were to get literally every piece of equipment that the original band has and played through that, but they just missed the point, the core, the soul of the actual artist. And whether it's down to Epitaph or not is up for debate. I don't know what way they run their label. I've heard from some artists that they are allowed to do whatever they want creatively, but that could be on a case-by-case basis, so I'm not sure entirely if it was Epitaph's idea to put in 2 new band members that are completely anonymous, but it makes sense marketing-wise, like, oh well, don't hire 2 more band members, because if we need to fire one of these 2, then, you know, they can be replaced easily because they're just in masks. It also baffles me that from a purely sonic point of view, the band sounds exactly the same as they did on their previous album that came out 2 years ago, and also their EP for that matter, which came out nearly 5 years ago. It's almost as though their first album had a completely different singer, and they need to re-establish that sound with their new singer, otherwise any kind of musical evolution will not be met with any kind of acceptance from the fans. All members of the band have got a history in music production and playing in various styles on various instruments, so they have a lot of skill in general to be able to do any kind of direction that they want to do. So it's strange that they would release something that sounds exactly the same, almost as though they were pressured into doing so by a record label. Or not, maybe I'm wrong, but it reeks of that to me. Campton has released a new album this year on his own. It's pretty good, totally different style from any other Teenage Wrist stuff. So maybe the band did choose to do the exact same thing again. And Campton didn't want to. Campton wanted to try something different. Maybe that's why he left. You know, there might have been creative differences, something like that. But then that means he would have just ended up having to leave because 2 of the band members were too stubborn to try anything different. These might seem like arbitrary thoughts and scenarios and everything like that, but the reason behind it is that no matter what way I spin it and imagine it in my head, I am not able to look at the band that is currently Teenage Wrist in a favourable or desirable way. No matter what the circumstances are, or the specific reasoning behind it, if I were to lay it out for you factually, Teenage Wrist are going to release an album that's probably going to sound exactly the same as their last one, but without the parts that make them unique. I believe this is due to record label interference, which is totally against the genuine, authentic nature of grunge music to begin with. This album will also feature a stale lead single that features a guitarist who probably committed sexual misconduct. Usually a genre gets at least until it's popular before it becomes stale and commercial. Somehow I've managed to get bored of this genre before it's even taken off, and it's just like, it's down to the fact that even though this is what should have replaced grunge music, it didn't. It masquerades as grunge with greasy hair and baggy clothes, and it has none of the actual ideals or soul or anything of grunge music. Even the band at the beginning had a lot of that stuff, and I looked at the original band as having all of those aspects that should replace grunge music in the modern era, but they didn't do that. The essence was lost along the way, and that is what I would call a manufactured band or brand. They're technically a brand at this point, because it's all about, I don't know. I'm not excited for new Teenage Wrist, in case you couldn't tell. It's hopefully the new album is better than I'm expecting it to be, but based off the first two singles, I'm not excited. They've somehow managed to have as much issues as bands that are twice as successful and twice as famous as they are in half the time. So due to technical difficulties, I am having to record the end of this video on a separate day, but it's kind of good because I get to test out this new lighting setup, new camera setup, and I also get to check out what this new Rode NT1A microphone is like on my voice. I just bought it and it's my first time trying it out, so it's a good excuse. But getting back to the end of the video. So leading up to the conclusion of the video, I would say that I'm mainly a big fan of bands that I can relate to, and relate to their message and relate to their emotions and what they're going through. I'm sure a lot of people out there are the exact same as me. And I'm not saying that Teenage Wrist have become entirely unrelatable and that they're not good people and that I dislike them as individuals. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm not saying let's go out and boycott Teenage Wrist, because that's totally unfair. At the end of the day, they're just a band trying to make money. The whole point of this video, and I guess the conclusion, is that I really did relate to this band and have such high hopes for them at the beginning of when I first found them 3 years ago. And over the course of those 3 years, I guess that has just fizzled out. And it's what makes me really believe that the genre died before it had a chance to really begin. So there you have it. That's pretty much what my thoughts are on the whole idea behind Teenage Wrist and the whole post-grunge or new grunge or whatever anyone wants to call it. That's my thoughts on it. Still go out and listen to them. I'm certainly going to be listening to the new album once it comes out, and I'll probably give my thoughts on it when it does come out. Until then, I have a few more video ideas. I don't know when they'll be up or when they'll be recorded, edited, whatever. I have no idea, but I am certainly eager to pursue a few ideas that I have been having that make me a little bit excited. Especially with my new setup. It's pretty cool. I'm enjoying it so far. So if you would like to see more videos, I do have some already up on the channel. You can feel free to subscribe and let me know what you think about the video in the comment section if you have any thoughts on the band as well. Lastly, of course, if you did enjoy, please do like and share and all that other stuff. I appreciate you for watching all the way to the end, and I'll talk to you next time.